Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's Carey Nieuwhof here, and I'm joined today by Elise Youngblood, who is the Vice President of Editorial at Barna. Elise, good to have you.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, we are talking about mental health awareness all this month because that's what it is, Mental Health Awareness Month. And we're very fortunate. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Kayla Steckline and Julie Wilson, both of whom have lost their husbands to suicide and have willingly talked to us and to others about sort of the challenges associated with that. But Elise, I know that you and all of us at Barna track mental health very carefully in leaders, and you've got a little bit of research to share with us as we get started. So what are you bringing today? What have you found looking at the data?
For sure. And I would add too, I think it's so great that we're creating space for this conversation and for this data. Tackling it both with research and with stories, I just think is so important and helpful. So to Julie and Kayla as well, coming together, I think, to draw attention to this and make it easier for leaders to be honest. It's just a first step. As far as the data goes, it was a hard year on everyone, but we'll see that here through the stories of pastors. So I'm going to share just a few stats from a study we did in late 2020, and this was with Protestant senior pastors. We actually conducted this study with Glenn Packiam, so friend of Barna and of the podcast. But we looked closer at pastors' well-being, and we just see that pastors are experiencing high levels of loneliness and isolation and even depression. So in late 2020, when we asked pastors about this, 73% said that they frequently or sometimes feel isolated, and 60% say that they frequently or sometimes feel lonely, which you might say we're in the midst of a pandemic. We're socially distant. Is loneliness that big of a deal? And I would just highlight two things about this stat, or about these stats, which is that when we asked pastors if they struggled with depression during their tenure of ministry, so I think going a step beyond things like loneliness and isolation, 59% of pastors last year said yes. And I would actually say we can probably assume that's higher. Survey respondents, especially pastors, they might have a rosy view. They might feel pressure to say the right thing. So there's certainly plenty of reasons they might be reluctant to express depression. So it's a big deal. I think that 59% of pastors said, yes, I have struggled with depression. But the other thing it's very high. And the other thing I would underscore is it's growing. So in 2016, when we asked that same question in our State of Pastors research, 46% reported having struggled at some point during their tenure in ministry. So it's not present, but it is at some point. So we see quite a jump there over the past few years.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that data. Anything else? Any other observations or data you want to share before we invite Julie and Kayla in?
I think, the natural next step would be to ask, why is this happening, or what can pastors do? I am no expert. I think it's important to talk to the experts on that and to listen to people. But one other thing we do see in the data, 39% of pastors say they seldom or never talk to someone about their mental health. And a far greater 75% say they have seldom or never met with a counselor. So alongside this heightened depression, which I would say on its face, we should be happy people are expressing that, and that they feel comfort to share that even via survey instruments. That's important that they're, being willing to discuss that. But we also see that they, are experiencing mental, emotional, and relational health challenges, and they're not necessarily either motivated or supported to share that. They haven't discussed it with others. They're not seeing counselors. So those two stats side by side, I think are really important for pastors to see themselves in. And I think for their support systems to be aware that they could be struggling and could need those outlets.
Let me just underscore that. Did you say 75% have never sought out counseling?
75%. And that was as of our fall 2020 study. Seldom or never.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is alarming,
Yeah.
but helpful and illuminating at the same time. Elise, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And well, I'm going to welcome in our guests. We have Julie Wilson and Kayla Steckline with us today. In September of 2019, Pastor Jared Wilson died by suicide. He was a husband, father, prominent advocate for mental health. And Julie and Jared have founded Anthem of Hope, a Christian mental health organization dedicated to amplifying hope for those battling brokenness, depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide. Julie is a mother to two boys, Finch and Denham. And Kayla Steckline is an author, speaker, mental health advocate, spreading awareness and offering hope. In August of 2018, Kayla lost her husband, Andrew, pastor of Inland Hills Church in California, to suicide. And she's written a book, which I would highly recommend, called Fear Gone Wild, a story of mental illness, suicide, and hope through loss. Kayla and Julie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I think you probably had an opportunity to hear some of the stats that Elise was sharing with us. Does that surprise you? Like, what is your reaction to that? First of all, almost 60% experienced some form of depression and 75% never sought help. Those really jumped out at me.
It breaks my heart. I mean, those stats just completely break my heart. And whenever I hear a stat, I think of a person and I think of my person. I think of Andrew, and I just know the suffering and the pain, and it breaks my heart that 75% never are seeking out help or have never sought out counseling. Yeah, it's just heartbreaking.
Julie, any thoughts from your perspective on what you heard?
Yeah, I mean, Kayla said it perfectly. It's just, I think it's so sad to know that people who spend their lives trying so hard to help other people and people who usually would freely tell everyone else that they come in contact with that they matter, they should get help, that it's nothing, there's nothing wrong with it. They don't feel like they're allowed to because of either the platform they're on or where they work or whatever it may be. And it's heartbreaking because they're people too. And I think a lot of times they don't really feel that way. And it's just so sad because we all need the freedom to be able to express what we're going through, what we feel, and to admit that we're not always okay.
Both of you have shared your stories publicly before, but just for any leaders who may not be aware of you, or would you be willing to share a little bit what happened in your lives? Julie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so Jared and I met in 2012, and pretty early on, one of the first things he said to me was that he struggled with mental health. And at the time, I honestly had no clue what that meant. And I thought that it was something that he used to struggle with, and that, now he's going to get married and have kids and we'll have the white picket fence and everything's great. And, life is better now and he's not ever going to deal with that again. I was so thankful. And I think I even said something along the lines of, well, I'm so glad that you don't deal with that anymore. And I'm sorry you did. I felt bad that he went through it and I hated that I wasn't there for him. But I honestly, as a 20-year-old, thought, okay, but he's past it and life's going to be great now and he'll never deal with it again. And I quickly realized that just wasn't how this works. And because he was so honest, thankfully, he was very open and transparent about his struggles. He led that way. And so from day one, we jumped into ministry together. He was pastoring and leading, and from the pulpit, from the stage, he always expressed his struggles and what he was going through. And he worked really hard to kind of end the stigma in the church surrounding mental health. He didn't want other people to feel the way he did. And he struggled really bad. I mean, it was an all day, every day kind of thing. And he was able to push through it. And he just wanted to use his voice to help other people. So we did that up until the day that he passed. And we were serving at churches, bringing our kids with us everywhere, and, just taking it day by day and struggle by struggle. He just would get up and try to help other people. And then in 2019, he unfortunately did pass away by suicide, and he fought hard. And, there was so many times that he would open up about how he was feeling, and he didn't want this to be the way that things played out. He was fighting really hard for his life and to help other people. And unfortunately, it just, it ended the way it did. And we just have continued to carry on his legacy, his goal of helping other people not feel as hopeless as he did, and to be brave like he was, and try to share that even when you're struggling, you matter, that you have a purpose, that you have a plan. And so my boys and I now are just kind of taking it one day at a time, trusting God and trying to help as many people as we can with what is a heartbreaking story. It's your worst nightmare come true, but I think that that's what God does best, is he takes the most broken pieces of our lives and he uses it to help other people who are hurting. And I truly believe that Jared's still helping people who are hurting, and that through his death, other people are finding life and hope. And so we just continue to share his story and try our best to let other people know that they're not alone.
I'm so sorry for both of you for your loss. I really am. Kayla, do you mind sharing what your story and Andrew's story was?
Yeah, so our story is a little different. When I met Andrew, he didn't have a history of struggling with mental health. He was definitely more of an intense, driven person, probably had a bent towards anxiety, but he had never struggled with depression in the past. And so for us, it was in 2017 when things started to shift. He was the lead pastor of our church. He had led our church through a very difficult 4-year leukemia journey that his father had battled, who was the lead pastor before him. And so Andrew had carried the mantle. He had become the lead pastor in a season of grief, never really took time off to heal. And he started struggling with panic attacks in the fall of 2017, and very debilitating, very scary season of panic attacks that eventually landed him in the hospital, and then landed him on a sabbatical, and then landed him in a psychiatrist's office. And it was in that psychiatrist's office in spring of 2018 that he was diagnosed with depression. And I'll never forget that moment of sitting in the psychiatrist's office and the psychiatrist looking at me and saying, "Your husband has depression." Like, I really never imagined that would be part of our story. I never imagined that would be something that Andrew would struggle with. He had led our family and led our church through so much. And in my eyes, he was this resilient, strong man. So it really was a shock to me. But Andrew was relieved. He was relieved to finally know what was going on inside of his body. And he and the doctors were super hopeful that he was on the low end of the spectrum with rest and medication and time off work and therapy, that he would be back to work in no time. And so we were doing everything we knew to do to get him better. And we were really open and vulnerable and honest with the church as well. I mean, they knew he was struggling with panic attacks. They knew he was struggling with anxiety. We weren't trying to hide anything. And so he was seeing a therapist, he was taking medication, he was taking time off work, he was spending time with mentors. And by the end of the summer in 2018, the doctors actually thought he was getting better, and Andrew thought he was getting better too. And so he was released to go back to work, and he hit the ground running, and he wanted to use his story to help others, just like Jared. He wanted to use his pain, he wanted to use his experience, he wanted to use his story to help others and give others hope. And so he went for it. I mean, he was talking about suicide. He was talking about depression. He gave out the suicide hotline number. He quoted stats from Barna. I mean, he knew the facts. He would have known where to go for help. And then headed into the third weekend, he just had a really awful day. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to recover. And the following morning, attempted suicide. And it was a complete blindside for all of us, for the team of doctors that was caring for him, for our church, for our family. I mean, we really did not understand the pain that he was carrying and the pain that he was experiencing on a daily basis. Like, I still do not understand that, and will never understand that. So he was rushed to the hospital, and they ran a bunch of tests, and unfortunately there was nothing they could do. And so on August 25th, 2018, he took his last breath, and I took my first in this life that I never saw coming as a widow and single mom of 3 little boys. So just like Julie, we're finding our way, and we're sharing our story and sharing our pain in hopes that it helps others. And I believe too that God has used Andrew's death in beautiful and incredible ways to reach into the pit and save other people's lives.
I appreciate you both sharing so openly with a view to helping others. And again, my condolences on the depth of the loss that I know you will continue to experience. But I think one of the things that shocked me, because I remember exactly where I was when I read about the death of Andrew and of Jared. With Andrew, I remember something came across my feed, and it was honestly, Kayla, it was the picture of you and Andrew and the boys that got circulated so widely in national news. And I'm like, what? Because you kind of have this picture in your mind of what people who are struggling, like what situation they'd be in, but like a growing church, young, vibrant, healthy, for that to happen. And then Julie, I didn't tell you this, but I was in my backyard with about maybe a dozen pastors who lead larger churches. And we were just on a mentoring 2-day thing. And we were standing around my barbecue, the Big Green Egg, when one of them said, "Oh, you'll never believe what just happened." And we all just stopped, frozen in our tracks, because we knew who Jared was.
Mhm.
And we knew what his life was about. And we just spent the rest of that night, just like, I'm sure, a fraction of what you were going through, of course, but just like shell shocked. And I think what hit a lot of leaders in both of the stories, there's so many differences, but the similarity is young, vibrant, bright future, young family. In many ways, things were going your way, so to speak. And I think it kind of held up a mirror to a lot of us and went, wait, it's not maybe the stereotype that we thought. Any reaction or response to that about the picture a lot of people have from the outside, but what it's like to be on the inside?
Yeah, I think for us, Jared and I were honestly in the best place we ever had been when it came to ministry and in the goals we had been after. Everything was kind of happening the way we were hoping it would happen. Jared was in his dream position. He was doing what he felt called to do and loved to do. We had our boys, we were settled, we were near family. And so honestly, throughout our whole marriage, this was probably the most steady we had ever been. And things were just kind of good. And so I think the crazy part is, like you were kind of saying, you can look at it and say, well, they had everything going for them, like things seemed fine, and they were. And I think that's what he struggled with, because he always felt like he needed to do the next thing, get to the next thing. And then when he reached it, I think it was almost this anxiety of like, well, now I have to continue doing this well, and I have to continue showing up day after day and doing this thing forever, almost. Like, I think the commitment of it, just everything was super overwhelming to him, and almost even the fear of losing it. Okay, I've gotten to this point that I've worked so hard to be at. How do I maintain it? How do I keep it? Am I good enough? Can I be the dad and husband I need to be, and also be the pastor and advocate I need to be? And I think that the pressure of everything was really overwhelming. So from the outside looking in, we were having fun, and Jared was super outgoing. I'm really outgoing. So we would post on social media, and it was a lot of fun times because that's who Jared really was. But when the pressure hit and when real life kind of hit, or he was just having a hard day, the things that everyone loved about him and that made him him were the things he battled with. Can I be the happy-go-lucky guy? Can I be the advocate? Can I really do this? And so yeah, I mean, from the outside looking in, it really was that's who we were. We were in the middle of the greatest season of our family and of our marriage too. And I think that is actually what made him get to the point he got to. He didn't know what to do with being settled and just kind of almost enjoying it being good. It's like he felt like he needed to do something more, or it wasn't significant enough, or that he was missing the mark somehow. If it wasn't at work, it was at home. And so it's crazy how the pressures of good things can sometimes outweigh the bad things going on in life, because there were seasons where life was really hard and he didn't struggle as bad. It was usually when everything was kind of going okay that he felt that pressure to, I guess, keep things in that spot. And so for us, we were at a place where he began getting anxious about, I guess, just being settled and being in a place of good, because I don't think he knew how to handle it almost. And so yeah, everything looked the way it was until it wasn't. And I think that he just really struggled with being someone that other people wanted to be like, because he didn't like himself. And that's the craziest thing, because from the outside looking in, we all, everyone who knew Jared loved him. He made you feel like you could do anything in the world in 2 seconds. You talked to him for 2 minutes, and the next day you're going after being the president. He just made you believe you can do anything in the world. And he just couldn't find that for himself. And so I think that was the biggest struggle for us, was that everything was really great. He just didn't know how to hold that.
Kayla, for you, there's always on the outside looking in, and Julie, hearing you talk, like, and Kayla and I have talked about this because I've had the privilege of spending some time with her, but my season of depression 15 years ago, which led to about a month where I was probably more seriously than at any time in my life thinking of suicide as an option. And, it's not, I look back on that and it feels like a different person at this stage in my life, but it was that pressure of success that led to an implosion, right? Like, it was bigger than it had ever been, better than it had ever been. On the outside, I was on top, but the inside, I was crumbling. From what I know of your story, is that a little bit what it felt like, Kayla, for you guys, or did it feel different? Or how about for you and Andrew?
Yeah, I think the thing about ministry, the thing about life is that there's no pause button. I remember Andrew saying that the Sundays just keep coming. They just keep coming and keep coming. And it's like you get off the stage and deliver the last of like 3 or 4 messages you've given that weekend, and you're already thinking about the next one. And so I think if you don't intentionally take time to rest and intentionally take time to stop and sit with God and sit with the Holy Spirit and have that quiet time and solitude time and fill yourself back up, that you're just going to be running on empty. And I think for Andrew, quiet and solitude wasn't a priority. Being successful, he was 30 years old when he died. So he was right in that season of life where I think he was really trying to prove himself. He had a lot to prove. He had big shoes to fill. I know that he felt that with the loss of his father and stepping into his father's position. Like, he had these big shoes to fill. He felt like he had to prove himself, had this young family he's providing for. He's leading a large church at a very young age with not a lot of mentorship or help. And I think he just completely ran himself into the ground, and wasn't taking the time to fill back up his reservoir so they could keep pouring out from a healthy, whole, just like fruitful place. I think he would have really benefited from taking more time to grieve the loss of his dad, from even taking a longer sabbatical. I mean, no one was telling Andrew to go back to work. The doctors weren't telling him to go back to work. I wasn't telling him to go back to work. The church wasn't telling him to go back to work. Andrew was telling himself to go back to work. I think he would have even benefited from a longer sabbatical season, but he just didn't want to stop.
I get that.
It wasn't in his DNA.
I totally get that. Yeah.
I think that's for a lot of pastors too. I think that the fear is that it's the fear of losing momentum. If I stop, people will keep coming. If I don't come back, I think for Andrew, if I don't come back in August when everyone's returning to church, if I don't come back then I'm going to stop the momentum and the church isn't going to grow and everything's going to fall apart. It's like you put yourself, Andrew would often say too, that he's the linchpin. He felt like he was the linchpin. He felt like he was the one that was holding everything together. And so I think it's that pressure of like, the church needs me. I'm the person, I'm the one holding it all together. They're going to fall apart without me. I think if we allow ourselves to be too much in our ego and not in that quiet place with God, that's when that takes over and we see ourselves as that, when in reality, we're not.
So we have a lot of church leaders listening, but we probably also have some spouses. And my guess is that this episode might be shared with some spouses. Can you walk us through what your experience as a spouse was? Kayla, we'll start with you on this one. What was that like leading up to Andrew's death and then in the aftermath?
Being a pastor's wife is hard. I think it's this idolized thing. I remember feeling so excited in college when I met Andrew and he was going to be a pastor. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to be a pastor's wife. Like, it was this idolized thing that I thought this was this huge honor. And I can't believe I get to do this. And wow, like, this is going to be so cool. And then we get into ministry and we're doing it. And I start to realize, Oh, it is
Mhm.
just like so much more than I thought it was going to be. It's so much more of a glass house, I think, than I thought it was going to be too.
Yeah.
Privacy kind of goes out the window, and you're put on this pedestal, and you feel like you can't go anywhere without running into somebody. And so I felt that pressure of being put together when I'm with my 3 kids in the middle of Target and one's having a tantrum, and like, oh no, who from the church is around me that's like seeing this happen, and they're going to think I'm like a terrible mom and like not cut out for ministry. So that pressure to look a certain way, to carry myself a certain way, to be this like put together presence that was standing next to their pastor. And then it was also super lonely. My community, my friend group, they attended the church. I didn't have a lot of friends, a lot of close friends outside of our church. And so when Andrew was struggling, I didn't really feel like I had people that I could talk to. I didn't feel like I could be honest with my close circle of friends. I was afraid that if I told them what was really going on at home, that they would judge Andrew, that they would think he's not cut out for ministry, that he's not fit for the job. I had that stigma in my mind that if he struggled with depression, and if he was taking medication, and if he was struggling with his mental health or thinking about suicide, that meant that he wasn't close enough to God or wasn't cut out for ministry, which I think is often a misconception and why so many people struggle in the dark. They're afraid to admit that. But it was a really, really lonely season. I'll never forget sitting in therapy, and our therapists were in couples therapy for 2 hours every single week that summer. And the therapist told me I was co-burdening Andrew's depression. I was co-burdening his depression and anxiety. So I was carrying it with him. And that was such an exhale for me of like, okay, that's why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. Because I was feeling, I was getting a taste of his depression and of his anxiety that summer. And I even struggled with some suicidal thoughts that summer too. I mean, it was so overwhelming. The pain and the turmoil happening in Andrew's mind and his body really spread throughout our home. And I was getting a taste, and my boys were probably getting a taste too, of just this turmoil that was happening inside of him.
Hmm. Julie, how about for you?
Yeah, so mine was kind of the exact opposite. So I was doing ministry on my own before I met Jared. And I remember specifically at the church going down the aisle and saying I had a call to ministry or whatever. And one of the deacons at the church said, okay, so what do you want to do? Do you want to do women's ministry or be a pastor's wife? And I remember as a 16-year-old, I go, oh gosh, no, I would never. And I didn't mean to, but I just kind of spit it out. And he was like, what do you mean? That would be such an honor being a pastor's wife. And I was like, no, I can't sit on a front row and just smile. Like, that's just not how I am. I want to get my hands dirty. Like, I want to do ministry. I want to serve. I want to do all these things. And so then when I met Jared, I actually had told him I didn't want to date at first because I'm like, I just don't think I can do it. I can't do the pastor's wife thing. Like I'm not perfect, and I don't just want to sit and look nice on the front row. And he was like, then let's not do it that way. Let's do it different. Let's do it together. And we ended up just traveling and speaking together, and it was really fun and exciting, and we had a great time. I mean, we talked about mental health, we talked about God mostly, and always pointing back to him. But I think that was the craziest part of the season we were in, is that we were having a great time. We did have a fruitful ministry. We had, a good church staff pouring into us. We had great friends. We had it all. But at home, it was like he was good as long as we were doing stuff and around people and out and serving, whatever it may be. But then at home, it's like that's when he just felt overwhelmed. He felt tired. He felt like he couldn't continue to carry, I guess, everything that was on his shoulders. And so it was such a weird thing, because throughout the day, we'd have pretty much usually really good days together, as long as he was surrounded by people and doing something. As long as he was busy, he was good. But then at home, it was just this shift. It's like, obviously, like all of us, we're comfortable at home. And typically, we kind of let our hurt out around the people that we're closest to, because we trust them. We don't think they're going to go anywhere. And so it was such a weird shift from day to day, knowing as long as he's busy and working and we're doing stuff, he's good. But then when I'd get home, it's like I'd almost pull my hair up and get ready. Like, okay, now it's time to be ready to be present for him, and kind of almost walk on eggshells, have things done so he doesn't have to worry about it. kind of play off his mood when he gets home from work. If he's in a really good mood, maybe I'll ask him to give the boys their bath tonight. But if he's kind of stressed, I'll let him, you know, kind of debrief from the day. And I didn't realize that had become my norm. It's not like I didn't even think about it anymore. It was, okay, he's walking up, whatever he says and how he's acting is going to determine our night. And without even realizing it, I had adapted to whatever he needed at all times to make sure that the house had some sort of peace and that he was okay. And that became just normal to me. Obviously, that's not healthy. It's not normal. You shouldn't ever, I mean, obviously serve your spouse, but you should never have to walk on eggshells. It's better to talk about it. And I had just gotten to the point where I thought that was the loving thing to do. And anytime you're losing yourself to save someone else, it's going to end badly. And so I think having a conversation when you notice yourself walking on eggshells, or you notice yourself getting uncomfortable when you need to ask for help or something, like that's when it's time to kind of sit down and have a serious talk. And I did a time or two, but looking back now, I would tell anyone who's living with someone struggling, like, talk about it. If you feel like their mental health depends on you being present, or you making things happen, or you making their life run well, it's probably a good idea to sit down and talk, because the fear would obviously be when we can't show up, because we're human. And there's going to be times that, I know so many times that I wasn't in the mood that day. I wasn't in the place where I could make the world go round for him. I was barely holding it together for me and my boys and just doing all the things I needed to do. So I think allowing yourself the freedom when you live with someone who's struggling with that, to know that you cannot save them. It's not your job to. It's not your job to make them happy or make their day perfect. You can't do those things. You can love them through it. And for me, that looked like trying to be really patient, because it's kind of hard when you don't struggle with that. I'm an overwhelmingly optimistic. I just am in all things. Everything is just possible. And I've always been this way. And so imagine Jared's frustration in life with that, because I was just always like, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. But I learned to understand that with him, that it didn't always feel that way, and it didn't look that way, and that was just his reality. And I learned to slow down and to hear him out, even when I couldn't see what he was seeing.
Walking in eggshells, Kayla, if I remember right, that's part of your experience as well, isn't it? Can you talk about that? Because I know there was a season, probably longer than I want to admit, where my wife, Tony, was walking on eggshells too, because of exactly the dynamic you described, Julie. Pressures at work, didn't know how to deal with it, come home, decompress. But, you know, it's why Tony these days talks about throw all the energy you threw into your leadership and your home life, which is something I'm learning to do and have learned to do. Was walking on eggshells part of your experience as well, Kayla?
Yeah, definitely. Andrew's mood determined the temperature of our home. It really did. And I remember even when he would walk through the door at 5 o'clock, or walk out of his office at 5 o'clock at home, and it changing the boys' moods too. You know, like, not only are they excited to see their dad, and so they get more hyper, but it really did. I mean, his mood and his happiness really affected the rest of us greatly. I'll never forget, it was the Wednesday before he died. So Wednesday night, he died Friday morning, or he attempted suicide Friday morning and died Saturday night. But that Wednesday night, I remember we were in our bedroom, and he was having an off night. He was a little stressed about the upcoming team night that Friday and the services on Sunday, and feeling like it was too much for him, and he wasn't easing back into ministry, and he was overwhelmed. And I remember I was trying to do what I had normally done for him, which was to bend over backwards like Julie, to do everything I could do to boost his mood and to help him and to take care of the kids, or to not put anything else on his plate. I was constantly trying to take stuff off of Andrew's plate and put it on my plate, which isn't a healthy way to be in a marriage or a relationship. I mean, the responsibility, especially of raising children, I feel like needs to be shared in the home, and it shouldn't be all put on one person. And for us in that season, I felt like a single mom. I mean, it really did prepare me for this season of single motherhood, because I was doing so much on my own. But that Wednesday night, I'll never forget. He's having an off night. I'm doing everything I can to help him switch back and like be okay. And we're in the bedroom, and I'm praying over him, and I'm feeling like, okay, like, I've done everything I can do to help him. And as soon as we say amen, he storms out of the bedroom outside to the backyard and is like pacing in the backyard, angry. And I'll never forget saying under my breath in that moment, gosh, why is he so unhappy? And I was just like, I had exhausted all my options. I had exhausted all my ways of helping him, and there's nothing else I could do. And I was exhausted myself.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's bringing back memories. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the local church. I know you both are. You're involved, but there are healthy things about the local church. There's unhealthy things about the local church. And for people like me who found things, I founded our church. We create our own ecosystems, right? And some of that is healthy and some of that is unhealthy. What are some unhealthy things you see in the church that you wish we could address? Because when you got, the majority of pastors who say, yeah, I feel depressed, and 75% are afraid or don't want to seek help or haven't done it, like there's an issue there. And this isn't a quick fix thing. This isn't like, okay, 45-minute interview, it's all fixed. It's like, but I think if we unearth some of the mess, we're going to be in a much better position years down the road. So what would you say, like, okay, if we could fix this about the church, we should all have a conversation about this. What is that to you, Julie?
Yeah, I think when it comes to being on staff at a church, just time off. I feel like a Monday off after a long weekend is not enough. It's just like Kayla was saying earlier, you're constantly working towards that next thing. We were at the church probably 5 days a week, bringing our boys to 6 or 7 different services over the weekend. And then you really just don't have time to be human at that point. And you're pouring out. And then when you get back home, you're totally depleted. You don't have any energy. It's not healthy. And just because you can do things really well doesn't mean you should do all things. And I feel like that's a dust statement, and that sounds obvious, but when you're in that world and you're good at what you do, it can be so hard to say no, because first of all, people are paying you to do this. It's your calling too. So you feel that internal struggle of knowing this is what you're supposed to do. But it's really hard to kind of be allowed to say, I'm not having the best week, and I might not be the right person to be hosting 6 services or whatever. You kind of just push aside your personal needs and do the job. You get it done. And I feel like with it being a church, us leading as believers and wanting to make other people find freedom and hope and health and all things in Jesus, we kind of forget that for ourselves. And I think the church as a whole, as staff, sometimes it can be hard to remember that we need that too, and that we need to be loved on, and we need to find hope and healing and restoration and rest and all the things that we offer to other people. And so I think one of the main things that Jared and I always try to talk to staffs about when we would do it together, and now I do it by myself, we would just encourage everyone. They'd say, how do you prevent burnout? And it's like, just allow rest. Don't wait for people to come to you burnt out before they get the sabbatical, before they get the rest, before they have the opportunity to breathe and be human. Because a lot of times, I mean, we've all seen it. People do get to finally go have their sabbatical or their time off or whatever it may be, but it's usually right before a breaking point. And I think if we could just allow people the gift of rest or time off before they break, I mean, that would just be not only so freeing, but just so healthy for the church in general. You'd be able to lead stronger. Your family life would be better. I think that's the biggest thing I've noticed throughout ministry, is just that there's a struggle for most pastors that I've known between wanting to be the husband and dad they're called to be and the pastor they're called to be, but the church winning most of the time, because in order to provide for the family, they need to be at the church and they need to perform well and they need to be available and they need to be on. And so I think just having some freedom to be human again and to be people. And yes, there is a calling and there is a way of life that you have to attain, and you should conduct your lives in a way that other people can look up to and try to model their lives after, especially new believers. You're basically just saying, this is what life with Jesus looks like. And when I look at scripture, I see Jesus followers struggling and having days that weren't great and going through doubt and having fears. And for some reason, we've lost that. I feel like in the church, we're not allowed to admit that as leaders, and we're not allowed to say, I trust Jesus, but I also get tired and I need rest and I don't do things perfectly. And I think just allowing people to have emotions and to be people again as leaders would be so freeing and would take off so much pressure and would only add to the health of the church. I mean, I always get more from people who are teaching, leading, whatever it may be, who are honest and vulnerable. That's where you kind of connect anyways, is when people are allowed to say, this is what I've been through, this is what I deal with, but you're not alone in it. We all can do it together and lead from that. I think if there was freedom in that, it would just be just so powerful and beautiful for the church as a whole, and kind of just biblical. I mean, it's what Jesus did. He went to the people who are hurting the most and used them as the example of what he can do. And I feel like we just have to kind of get back to the basics and just allow ourselves to be people again.
What would you change in the church, Kayla, if anything? So let's remove that pressure. We have enough on its own. What would you get rid of?
Mm-hmm. I think the structure is broken. I think the structure of the one person at the top, I know not all churches are that way, but I think it's pretty common that there's one person that's at the top and that person also sits at the top of the board. So there's not a lot of accountability for that person. They can kind of do and say and be and do whatever they want. I also think that burden of leadership needs to be shared. I think it's the impossible job to be the CEO of an organization and also the visionary of the organization and also the mouthpiece of the organization, and having to come up with these compelling messages every single weekend. I just think it's the impossible job. So I think the structure needs to change. I think the way that we structure, especially at the top of the organization, needs to change. I know Andrew would have loved to be the teaching pastor. He talked about it that season during his sabbatical. He was floating around that idea to different people that he looked up to. And I'll never forget him saying that he just got off the phone with one of his mentors and he said it was a terrible idea, and not to give away the control, not to give away the power. Like, he needed to stay in his position and not just become the teaching pastor. But I think he would have thrived being the teaching pastor. I think it would have been a better fit for him. So I think lead pastors being able to voice their strengths, and then also being able to voice their weaknesses, and being able to pass off those weaknesses to some other people that are also sitting at that same level as them. I think there should be more than one person at the top. I think the burden of leading the church and carrying the mantle at the top should be shared. And I think there needs to be better accountability for people at the top as well. I mean, someone needs to be able to tell the lead pastor no. Someone needs to be able to stand in front of them and say, you're not well and you're not getting on stage today. And we didn't have that in our situation. And so I think that would be huge. I also think just normalizing mental health conversations on staff. I think having a mental health check-in more often than not, maybe once a month, maybe once a week, sitting with your team and having a mental health check-in and making it normal. I think even staff pouring some of their money into offering therapy for their staff, offering free therapy. There's so many resources out there that are already connected to churches anyway. Like, why not offer that as a resource to your team and to your staff? I know that we did. If people were struggling, we would send them to therapy and cover some of the sessions. So if you're listening to this, your church might do that. If you're struggling and you think therapy is too expensive, like, you could always go to your lead pastor or your direct report and ask for that. And I think a lot of the times churches will pay for that, but it's just not something that we talk about. It's not something that we even know is available to us. So I think normalizing the mental health conversations and also just sharing the burden of the responsibility and having some accountability in place.
Well, this could be a 3-hour conversation for sure. I want to thank you both for sharing openly, sharing from your heart, being candid. And I just want to echo what you've said, that therapy. I mean, I don't know how much money I've spent on therapy over the years, but I can honestly say that in the grace of God is the reason I'm still here today, able to do what I do. So I see it as an investment, not an expense. And there's lots of things you can cut out of the budget before you can afford therapy. So I just want to echo and underscore that. And maybe that's a good start. Tell somebody. So where can people find you online these days if they want to know more? Julie and then Kayla.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. That's pretty much where I update everything on our life, what the boys and I are doing. And that's just, it's Julie Wilson. And then you can also go to our Anthem of Hope website, which is just anthemofhope.org. And we have resources concerning mental health, where you can get counseling. And we also have a live chat where you can talk with what we call hope coaches. If you're struggling or feeling sad or thinking about taking your life and you just want to talk to somebody and just maybe get some answers or some help, you can go there.
Thank you. Kayla, for you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram as well. My Instagram handle is Kayla Steck. I just started a podcast. The podcast is called Rebuilding Beautiful. And I wrote a book. It's called Fear Gone Wild. And that's sold wherever books are sold.
Thank you both so much. I'm really grateful. You have helped so many leaders today and in all the other work you do too. So thank you so much for being open. Thanks so much for sharing. And thank you, leaders, for listening. I really appreciate it. Hey, do check out metashare.com/church pulse. If you're a member there, please know they also have access to counseling if you're a MetaShare member. And if not, well, you can check that out if you want to. And thanks to our partners at Subsplash too. They've helped over 14,000 churches stay connected to their people. Check them out over at Subsplash. And thank you so much for listening. We're back. We're going to drill down even further on mental health on these episodes these days of Church Pulse Weekly. We're with you. We're cheering for you. And yeah, if you can get to the bottom of all of this, I think you're going to find a lot of hope, a lot of healing.